I come outside the house with my hands up, and the guy had a gun. Obviously, I you could see he clearly had a gun pointing at me. And then he gestures for me in an aggressive way to get on the floor on my knees and put the hands behind my head, basically. And John was in the same way. And and then basically, I was basically reading my last prayers. It's amazing how when you're convinced or pretty much convinced that you're going to get executed right now. This is the time where you're going to die now. This is the time where you get off. Uh, there was no fear or anything. It was just like, okay, just do what you got to do because there's no point. It's a weird feeling. You know what I mean? It's almost like a sense of calmness in a way because you can't do anything when the guy's got a gun to your head and he's always got to do his pull his finger a quarter of an inch and literally that's it. That's it's over.
The intro clip you just heard comes from my conversation with Imran. He's a cyclist that has ridden his bike around the world 26,000 miles and counting. That's right, 26,000 miles and counting. With me, he takes the time to explain his motivation, his passion, and his drive for why a person would want to ride a bike that far. And he also answers the not so mundane questions of logistically just how an adventure like this comes to happen. He goes through his stories, both good and bad, stating that it's because of the trying times that you learn to appreciate the good times all the better. I was blown away by his willingness to strike out on a grand adventure, his passion for life, and his ability to overcome obstacles. Imran is a truly inspiring person, and I want to take the time to thank him for sitting down with me. We did have some technical obstacles when recording, so the video you're watching has been graciously provided by Imran. It's his journey around the world, and it may not directly correlate to what we're talking about. It does give you a sense of what life is like for Imran when he strikes out on these adventures. With that, let's get started. Okay, Imran, welcome to the podcast. I am so excited to have you on. This is a platform and a format to highlight adventurers, everything they do, and kind of dig in deeper to their world. When I was researching you, I found, frankly, what you do is so big, so daunting, and a little bit obscure. So I'm excited to wrap my head around it with you and hear more of the details. Would you mind introducing yourself and telling us a little bit about what you do?
Well, thanks for having me on your podcast, Eric. But yeah, what I do work-wise, I guess I've got some investments. I have a small property portfolio that I had for a few years, which is funded some of my ventures. But ultimately, I'm always looking for the next adventure more than anything. I'm always planning and looking at to get me out of the house, do something of some sort. But like I said, it definitely never started from there. It started from humble beginnings. I know when you see me on my channel, it looks like I'm this big adventurer, whatever people see. But the start of it all is very, very, it's pretty humble considering where I started from to what eventually went on to do. So.
I'm told, I think I need to rephrase that question. I'm told it's very American to ask where you do or what you do. And it's kind of maybe more of a career response, but you have, the big one is cycled around the world.
Yeah.
As well as done many numerous trips bicycling. Am I framing that in the right way?
Yeah. That is pretty much it in a nutshell. Really, I have done the big one. Obviously, was the circumnavigation around the world, but then I have done. I mean, being in Europe is quite easy. It's simple. The countries are, especially in Western Europe, have open borders. So I kind of started there. That was my starting ground. But yeah, so I've done Europe and I've also cycled across America's Route 66. I've done North Africa, which I think me and my friend, we were trying to be the first or known first people to cycle from the Maghreb, being in Morocco, all the way to Tunisia. And just some other little adventures as well, just, more close to home. But yeah, that's...
You kind of so casually throw that out, but these are are huge adventures, and I know my audience is made up of a wide array of
Yeah.
adventurers and listeners, and so they might not necessarily know. Can you just kind of take us through? I would refer to it as bike packing. Is that
Yeah.
what you would call yourself? Yeah. So
Uh,
what
bike.
is that? Yeah.
The, sorry. Yeah. There's definitely a difference. There's definitely a differentiation between bike packing and a bike tourist. A bike packing is
Mm.
more of a recent trend for the last almost decade now, I would say, where you would pack as minimal as possible, and the bags would essentially be strapped to the bike frame itself. And you have to be more meticulous about your packing. Whereas a cycle tourist is usually, somebody who's not so meticulous about packing as light as possible. It's more comfort, more for the long haul, I would say, and that setup would usually incorporate a bicycle rack with panniers at the back, where you can put things on top of the panniers as well and strap them down with bungee straps, like my setup was. And I also have a rack at the front of the bike where I can mount an extra two smaller bags at the front. So that's the difference between bike packing and bike touring in a nutshell.
That's a great distinction, one that I had never thought about. I think
Mm,
maybe I came into this a little bit more recently, and
yeah,
would have used the term bike packing as a more generic one. But that's a
yeah.
real interesting nuance point. So now your bike is, and I'm hoping listeners have a chance to visually see what it is. And I think of be a traditional road bike or a traditional bike
Mhm.
loaded down with bags that actually adds a considerable amount of weight, I imagine, to the bike. What is your kind of base rate range for the bike, and then how much gear are you adding to make this journey possible?
Well, I mean, there's been different setups for different journeys, but speaking specifically about the world journey, I mean, we'll start from the bike.
Hmm.
I wanted a steel, robust frame that would, with no suspension, just basic as it is, basic steel forks, basic steel frame, and basically it's almost like cheap and cheerful, really. I get all the, if anybody knows about bicycle componentry, that I get the 9-speed Shimano Dior, which is cheap and cheerful stuff. It's
Hmm.
all hard wearing stuff. You get a lot of miles out of it. It's 9-speed. So it's a very, very basic setup. Okay.
Hmm.
Steel, I had to be specific about the material being steel, because steel is a very absorbing, forgiving material, specifically on a bumpy terrain. It really absorbs road shock very, very well. It's a very comfortable material, although it can be heavy. In my case, my bike was pretty heavy, and it's a thorn. The bike is a thorn bike. It's a company based in Somerset, in the southwest of England here, and they actually specialize in bikes that are made for the roll-off gearing, which is like this, the roll-off hub gearing. If you're familiar with that, it's hub gearing, and the bike that I
Right.
have is the only bike that they released where you can put a regular rear derailleur on there. So like the regular setup that you see every day on a bike. That's exactly what my setup is. So it's nothing
And,
elaborate. It's
right.
nothing. Yeah.
And was
So
was that was that choice, kind of going to the 9-speed Dior? That is I mean, I know you said cheap and cheerful, but I would
mhm,
say a real durable setup, as well as an available setup in case
yeah.
you have to replace parts or something like that. It seems like I would guess that the majority of the world, if they do have spare
Mhm,
parts, it would be towards something like that, as opposed to a roll off, which is a real
exactly.
obscure part. Yeah, is that kind of what that was your mindset there?
Exactly. Also, we've got to play to budget. A roll off, according to themselves, never fail, but they are a lot more expensive, and they are very reliable, used by famous tourists all over.
Hmm.
But for the average person, rather than spending over 1,000, $2,000, let's say, on a hub gearing system like the roll off, you could spend a couple of hundred, dollars, I guess, and get the Shimano stuff. So you're right there. It is cheap, it is durable, and it is accessible. Should I? And it did actually happen in my world journey where I did need parts, and even my mechanical shifter. Even that failed when I was in Detroit, actually, and I managed to get one when I picked another one up in Canada. But yeah, you're absolutely right. It's cheap. It's cheap. It's durable, and it's pretty much replaceable internationally. Generally speaking, not obviously in sub-Saharan Africa, for example, and anything
Sure.
like that. But yeah, yeah.
I found when I do these packing adventures, I'm bringing a considerable amount of extra gear just in case something goes wrong, cables, tubes, that kind of stuff. Do
Yeah.
you have the same approach, or how do you think about that?
Absolutely. I mean, depending on the specifically like a world journey. I mean, I would bring the very basics. For example, first of all, I set up with some tires that I know are durable, very extremely durable tires to start off with. But then I would have a couple of spare inner tubes, maybe just one inner tube. I would probably have a gear cable and some spare basic tools on me, and. And when I was going around the world, I actually took a spare chain with me as well because I knew that after like 4 or 5 thousand miles, that chain is gonna need a new chain because if you change the chaining time, then you can get more miles out of the cassette, the cassette cogs at the back and the general drivetrain components. Whereas if you wear it out and ride it really worn and keep wearing that out, then everything wears together. If you know what I mean. So I did take a spare chain with me. So I took very minimal things. I tried to take the smallest room in my bags to accommodate for that because you do have to, especially if you're going to do bike adventure, the most likely thing to happen is a puncture. I say on average that's the most likeliest thing. So at least you need to have a pump, a puncture kit, a spare tube. You need that at least, and just to have some basic know-how as well on how to change a gear cable, for example, on how to swap a chain out or how to link one up if the chain snaps. Just some very basic mechanical, no, you need to have some very basic mechanical knowledge, I would say, before you embark on a journey of any length.
I like that call out that out of everything, a puncture is really the most common mechanical problem to have on the road. Did you have quite a few punctures?
Well, I think I may have even set a record here, but I'm going to give you some pretty interesting facts here. I set off on some 26-inch, which is a old mountain bike circumference tire. There were Schwalbe Marathon Plus tires, and my first puncture occurred after doing 16,500 miles, not kilometers, miles. That was my first puncture after 16,500 miles from doing some of the world's
That's
roughest
incredible.
roads. Yeah, yeah. And I actually managed as well, believe it or not, I managed to get around the world doing 25,000 miles on a single set of tires. They were extremely worn out by the end. I'll even show you some images of the worn out tire compared to a new tire. But I was obviously risking, a lot of things to try and get around the world on a single set of tires. But yeah, that's the stats of that. Yeah, so I had one puncture. My first puncture was after 16,500 miles, and then
That
yeah,
alone is incredible. I had no idea.
with
First of all, I
luggage.
had no idea. That's it. Yeah, I had no idea that a set of tires could go that long. First of all,
Neither
and
did I.
you definitely have set a record here.
Neither did I. I mean, this is it. I mean, I see what it was is it was I was on the outskirts. I just crossed Australia, which was my 27th country on my world tour, and I was just on the outskirts of Sydney when I felt a little bounce in my back tire, and I go, surely I can't have punctured, and lo and behold, a little shard did penetrate through there, and it left a little gash there, and I went on to puncture a few more times when I got into Europe. When I got into Europe after crossing America, it was on that same gash, but one tire remained puncture free for the entire 25,000 miles.
You must have worn through almost all the layers, right down to the tube.
Well, the thing is, when a Schwalbe Marathon Plus tires begins to wear out, you can see some small little blue dots surfacing through the black material. That's the puncture resistant place. So it initially comes out in small little sporadic dots first, like almost like road markings, if you like in the center of your tire. Like little small ones, and then those little small, they start off being a couple of millimeters small, and then they get bigger and bigger. to where they become a couple of centimeters. Then they all start to connect. Then it becomes one blue strip, and then that blue strip eventually was like the widest part of my tire because it was that worn out. But the fascinating thing was that when I got to the start of the United States on that journey, which was my 29th country, I was in San Francisco, and already by then I'd done at that point I'd already done I would say about 18,000 miles to that point. And I was in San Francisco, and I looked at my tires and I thought, listen, I got to change these tires now. There's no way I can risk going across America with some
Sure.
really worn out tires. I'm in San Francisco, everything was accessible here. But then I thought to myself, well, listen, if I can, I had this vision of maybe I can get around the world on one single tires. I wonder if I can do that. Then the other part of me was saying, well, listen, if I have a blowout and I got to hitch a lift, which I never had to do on my world journey, other
Hmm.
than having to get on a plane or cross the waters. If I had a blowout and I had to hitch a lift, then I'm not going to forgive myself. Do you know what I mean? And I'm going to really kick myself, thinking that you should have got those new sets of tires. But then the other part of me was saying, no, listen, let's just go, man, because surely I will be able to get some tires if I, and I with that gamble, I've ended up doing more than 4,000 miles across America on that American leg of the journey, even crossing a little
Wow.
bit of Canada without a single puncture. So
So
exactly,
you didn't set out necessarily to ride that far on one set of tires. It was just kind of something that evolved over time.
I didn't set off to even cycle around the world initially. This is
Oh, I didn't
something.
realize
No,
that.
no, I didn't. Because this is one thing I would say to the listeners is that when you think of a journey, any kind of journey that seems big, sometimes it can be a bit overwhelming. Just a thought of thinking, okay, I'm setting up from my house and I'm going to get around the world. What I said to myself was before I did actually go around the world, I just said to myself, okay, I'm leaving my house. Let's see if I get as far as China first. Okay, if I can get to China,
Leads to China is a huge journey in and of
it is.
itself.
It's huge. It's massive. I could
Okay.
never contemplate such a thing. Even before I set off for my home, I was absolutely daunted by that. You know what I mean? Just thought of it, and this is the apprehension part of it. When you're thinking about a journey and thinking that you're going to do something, and then you have this scare in your mind, that can become overwhelming itself. But it's amazing that once you once you're packed and ready and the wheels start turning on the bike, your mentality just flips. It's like a switch. It's like almost two different people. Then now you're focused, and now you're ready to take whatever comes. It's just the apprehension before, which I found was the hardest bit about going around the world was the bit before going around the world. Believe it or not.
Well, I can understand that just because I try to wrap my head around your adventures and they're daunting in itself. Where does the motivation come from to do this?
When you fly, 'cause I remember flying to Saudi Arabia once back before going to cycling back in the mid 90s. And I remember seeing people around me. They were looking at small screen TVs, or in front of the seat, or they were plugged into the headsets. I was just transfixed from the view outside. It was a clear night, and I got like this amazing glimpse of going across Europe, and then eventually, it was only like a 5 6 hour flight to Saudi Arabia. It was all in the night time, and I was just enamored, and I was absolutely hypnotized by the view outside, thinking, wow, it would be
Hmm.
amazing to just traverse that. That's kind of where the seed initially came from. And then I got into cycling a few years later, and then it never occurred to me to start traveling on my bike. I mean, I got into cycling in about 1997, and I've been cycling around, the area, around about, cycling to a few counties nearby. Never really going too far, staying over. The furthest I'd ever been was probably about, I don't know, an 80-mile ride to go and visit my friend in a university in another town. And uh,
Hmm.
and then it wasn't until one day when I was cycling locally, and I saw a bicycle that was parked up next to a village hall. I never saw the owner initially. I just saw a bicycle, and the bicycle was laden with all the stuff that you see like you see in my world bike. The bags were at the front, bags were on top of bags at the back. There were bags at the front. There was a bar bag on the bars, and I paused and I looked at the bike and I said, "Wow, look at that! whoever owns this bike is either come from afar or he's going far. This guy is
Mm.
traveling. So I waited for a few minutes. I never saw the owner. Then I just carried on with my bike ride, and then I took a bit of shelter in a little town a few miles ahead because it started to rain. And then I got on my journey again after hanging around the town. And as I was going the other way, I saw that same bicycle, you know, again, and this time
Yep.
obviously with the guy riding it. And then I stopped in front of him and said, "Listen, where are you from? Where are you going to?" And he was a guy from Holland, and he was on an 80-day tour around Europe. And I was so fascinated by it. And I thought, okay, listen, can I ride with you for a minute? I can show you there's a camp. It was late in the day. And I said, listen, I know a campsite here. I can take you to the campsite. And I just want to pick your brains a little. And so I rode with
Hmm.
it for a few miles. And we rode and then, but there was like this one really steep hill to get to the campsite. Okay. And I know this hill. It's quite famous in locally. It's quite a famous hill locally. If anybody locally is listening, then it's called the East Shevin Road. It's a very steep climb. It's like 20% for a few hundred meters. And I remember
Hmm.
seeing this guy, and he put it down in his easy gear, and his bike was way down. I mean, like really way down. And I couldn't believe that this guy, even though he was going at, let's say, walking pace, he was actually cycling up this hill with all that luggage. And I thought to myself,
Sure.
my God, I got to do this. And then I took him to the campsite. I saw him then get out of his tent, his sleeping bag, his sleeping mat, lay all out in his tent. And then, lo and behold, he even had a foldable chair with him. Would you believe a small little camping foldable chair? And I said to this guy, listen, my name is Imran. His name was Willem. And listen, when you finish your journey, please email me, get in contact with me. Okay, I'm really interested in this. And so, true to his word, a couple of months later, I got an email from him, and he said, well, next year I'm going to tour Holland, and we can have a ride there, and I'll take you on a journey with me. And I thought, oh, this is amazing. I mean, I got somebody here who's experienced, and so I got a rack, I got a few bags, and the next year, and I got everything for the journey. But then I broke my wrist on a training ride, and then
Mm.
I didn't manage to do that ride with him. And then we planned. Then he said, okay, well, we'll go again in August, but this time we'll just do a bigger one. We'll just cycle the whole length of the Alps. So that was my first tour, basically. We're cycling the length of the French, Italian, and Swiss Austrian Alps, starting from Holland. So I kind of dived in the deep end, really. But at least I had somebody who is experienced, who knew stuff. So really, that's in and out how I really got into the idea of traveling on a bike. When I came. I'm sure I would have got into it somehow. I would have clocked in it somehow. But back in those days, back
Sure.
when as early when I was really getting into cycling, that was really what got me started. Was seeing a gentleman by the name of Willem, who I'm still in touch with today, and he was kind of like I would say like my mentor, really, for the
Hmm.
first couple of journeys.
It's such an incredible kind of like transformation, right? Going from just the seed of the idea
Hmm.
to finding a mentor and then being able to jump in the deep end and expand
Yeah, yeah,
beyond that.
100%.
Is one of the reasons why I love biking and all its forms is that you really get to experience the environment, right? When
Oh yeah.
it's cold, you're cold. When it's rainy, you're getting rained
Yep.
on. It's just kind of rolling through these towns,
Hmm.
you really get a street level view of, I mean, in your case, how the world works,
Mm.
and it sounds like that's part your motivation.
Well, I always said that the bicycle is like your ringside view to the world, really. Like it's like having a ringside
Mm.
seat, to a boxing match. And the bicycle, this is exactly what I say. You are not sheltered from anything. You can feel the wind, the rain, the heat, the cold, every little gradient, even if it's only 1% or 2%. You feel that on a bike. You really know the contours of your land, so you really experience as it is and how it is. And what I say about a journey is like sometimes there's days where you are struggling to get through those days, and sometimes you want to quit. And that's part and parcel of a journey. You've got to experience the lows and the highs, but it's also important to experience the lows, because without experiencing the lows, you'll never appreciate a high. When everything is better when you've been in a low place, in a tour or in your life, and then to have a euphoric day, that is the sense of appreciation is almost tenfold or hundredfold, if you like. Do you know what I mean? Depending on your situation. And the bike really allows. The bike is a great tool to allow you to do that, because you can, unlike walking, you can cover many miles a day but yet see things at the same time, smell, breathe, really get a grasp of where you are and your surroundings that you would never get from, being in a car, or certainly you can get from walking, but you would never be able to accumulate such distances in a day with walking,
Mm.
and how efficient the bicycle is as a tool. It's just never. I said it's been 25 years I've been cycling, and it's never been lost on me. Has what the bicycle really offers you, not just on the bike itself, but how you can take a lot of transferable skills to when you're off the bike as well.
The journey always continues.
Indeed.
Are you, when you're doing this, when you're doing the world trip, are you bringing camping gear? Are you thinking at night you're staying in hotels or hostels, or how are you approaching that?
It was a real mix of things. I mean, I knew that obviously I had the full setup to sustain myself, being a tent, having a cooking equipment, obviously my sleeping bag, having a liner, pillow, the whole works, some clothes, all that stuff. But obviously, there are times when you come to a city, for example, or a big town, then finding a campsite or would be probably harder to camp in a city, or sometimes you just find really cheap accommodation where you can get a charge of your devices, have a shower, have a nice bed for the night. So it was a mix of things depending on where I was, really. It just depends where you
Mm.
are. So when I was going around the world, it was certainly a mix of, staying in accommodation, even staying with warm shower hosts as well. If you heard of the shower, if you heard of the website Warm Showers. Warm Showers is a website that is cyclists all around the world that host other cyclists who happen to be. It's a bit like couch surfing, but for cyclists. You know.
Sure,
So
sure.
I use that. You can use that a few times. Sometimes people call into their homes. Sometimes you sleep. Sometimes in mosques, in churches, whatever. Anything anything where you can just lay out a sleeping bag and get a good night's rest. Really. Whether that be a hotel or a public building or anything like that.
That's something that I noticed from your videos. Is it you're kind of constantly getting invited into people's
Mhm.
homes for a meal, or for for the night or for the evening. That's got to be one of the most rewarding and richest aspects of these trips. Just seeing the
Well,
locals.
the word, when people think of vulnerability, they think of a negative term. They think of being vulnerable is not necessarily a good position to be in. But vulnerability can be one of the best things, one of the best qualities of life. When you're on a bicycle, you are vulnerable. You are vulnerable
Mm.
to a lot of things. The traffic, being attacked, all these kind of things. You are vulnerable. But that also that that vulnerability also is gives you a one-on-one connection with people. People are intrigued by like I was intrigued by that gentleman when I first saw 20 more than 20 years ago. People are more inclined to come and make contact with you, to invite you to their homes, to see what your journey is about, to interact with you. That vulnerability, makes you be. Makes you be. No threat of any kind, and people are more inclined to
Mm.
engage with you. So, you can take the word vulnerability and become such a positive thing. If you allow it to be, if you're daring to venture out into places that you would never think twice about venturing into, or doing a bike journey altogether, you will find that people are really open to. They almost gravitate towards just the way your appearance and the way you're traveling.
I definitely see huge aspects of the vulnerability, as you would talk about. I would also use another word, kind of openness, is
Yeah,
that it
yeah.
seems like, right, you're open to these adventures, to these
Mm.
kind of spontaneous events happening.
Yeah, but yeah, of course, it's definitely being open, which is the opposite of vulnerability. But there is that aspect of that vulnerability, and I just want to say that
Sure.
it's not always being. The vulnerability on a bike is not necessarily a bad thing. Like I said, it
Mm.
is that openness, and really, really, you find that it's that openness, that aspect, that actually gets you
Hmm.
gets you around the world, as it did for me. Because there's one point where I just got bored and I just wanted to go home. Not bored, but I was just. There were times where I just had enough of seeing things. I just thought, okay, I'm not really, I'm
Sure.
not really. connect to his journey as I should be, and then you'd have a great encounter with somebody, and then that's just almost like the wind you need in your back to make you go further and further. Sometimes you go long periods without these interactions with people, and you kind of get lost into the reason as to what you're doing and why you're doing it. Sometimes if you've been on the road for an extensive period of time, which is what happened with me. But every time I had a great encounter with somebody, that was always like the sail in my, the sail that I needed, the wind in my back. That was always like the push that I needed to carry on going and going and going, until I eventually, managed to circumnavigate the entire world.
Now, you did this trip by yourself, solo, correct?
I was with somebody for the first 4 months, but for a year I was by myself. So I started with a friend.
Wow.
So it was only me and another person, and then from Arabia onwards, I was by myself.
I'm envisioning long stretches of time when it's just you're alone with your own thoughts on the road, truncated by great interactions with people and all that.
Yeah.
What does a typical day look like for you?
A typical day, well, I adapt to being. I'm not a morning person, but when I'm touring, I've definitely become a morning person. A typical day can be, you wake up. I'm on the road for 7. I usually don't have any breakfast because the meal the night before keeps me energized until I can find the next food stop. And then the route's mapped out in front of my Garmin, and then I would stop. Sometime in the afternoon, probably take a power nap of some sort, and then that's pretty much it. It's as simple as that. You just carry on going, but what I would do is I'd always start to look for a place to set up camp when the sun is setting, or just before, or sometimes after it's set. On most occasions, I found myself most nights setting camp in the dark. Much more than I did in the daytime. So that's what a typical day would envision, really. It's as simple as that. You just carry on going until it's time to set up camp.
In many of your videos, you are riding into the night, which seems like it's an entirely different mindset. As day changes to night, so you don't have a pre-planned endpoint for the day.
No. This is what it is. You see, I love the spontaneity of starting from somewhere and not knowing where I'm going to end up sleeping that night or who I'm going to meet. It's just like this is what I'm trying to say. This kind of lifestyle, this nomadic lifestyle, is so spontaneous. You don't know what you're going to see that day, to who you're going to meet, to where you're going to sleep at night. And it's such a contrast from routine and everyday as people know it. When life becomes monotonous, what time you wake up, who you're going to see at the office, what your routine is going to, what you're going to do. And that just kills time. It makes time fly. So this is why we say, oh, years gone back fast. It's because you have no grasp of time, whereas your whole concept of time changes. Your whole vision of time changes, and the whole concept in terms of just how you how time kind of like passes when you're on the road. If I've been on the road, for example, for a week, it can seem like I set off a month ago, literally, because every day has been so different. All those 7 days in the week have been so different to the last that it just extends time. It's almost like extending your life. Your concept of time completely changes. Like I can do a week journey. I did a tour of Wales a couple of years ago, and I was only on the road for like 10 days. And by the time I got home, honestly, it felt like I'd gone away for a month because every day was so drastically different. But at the same time, it's strange because it almost looks like it was over, just like that also, But certainly when you're on the road, it really extends your time that you have on the road, because it's so different. It's like a new, like when every day is such a fascinating day because it's almost like when a child, he's always fascinated by new things. He's fascinated by this toy, fascinated by colors. A child can get bored of a toy, and then you have to give him another toy, and then all of a sudden he's excited again. And it's almost like that when you're touring. Really, you're always excited. You're always you're always turned on. Your brain chemistry of your being that child is always turned on when you're on the road. Everything's new to you. You don't know. That unexpected spontaneity, is really what keeps you on your toes. And
The days are fast, but the weeks are long,
mhm.
or maybe vice versa. I'll let you fill that in. But when you're riding along, how much are you just in the moment, enjoying the scenery, enjoying what's happening, versus how much are you thinking ahead, saying, "Oh, I need to make it to here's a town coming up, or
Yeah.
I can make it to the next town beyond that."
Well, usually I'm pretty easy going. I mean, I don't really have a place to
Okay.
get to unless I have unless I'm limited on time. But the only time I would start to think like that is when it comes to setting up camp. Really, when it gets late in the day, I'm thinking, okay, where am I going to set up camp because I can't find anywhere here for miles. All the land to my left and right is private, and it's getting dark. And sometimes that's always I've never been settled by that thought. But trying to find even though most of my time whenever I set up camp has been in the night. You always find somewhere, but it's always that's the only time where I will start to get a little bit, okay, I feel like I'm racing against time here. You know what I mean? I've got to be in bed. I want to, I need some shut eye by this time because I've got to set up camp, find somewhere, then I've got to eat as well at the same time, but not go sleep straight after I've eaten, if you like. So that's the only time of the day it would be towards the end. But honestly, for me, the always been the same format. You just get on your bike and you just, the route's there, but there's no end point for that route to get to in the day. You just go to wherever really. I just like the freedom, and that's also part of the freedom because you don't have an itinerary as of such, because you are self-sustained. You don't have to like, okay, I've got to like get to the next hotel, but this hotel's another 20 miles away, and we've got a headwind, and the weather gets really bad. But you've got to make it there, But with the tent and we're not having that itinerary, you can bail out whenever you find the next suitable spot to set up tent, really, And it gives you so much more freedom in that sense. So you're not really constrained by time, really, if you know what I mean.
I want to make sure we have a chance to talk about the Morocco trip,
Yeah.
which it's the first video of yours that I found, and it's an incredible journey. So you are the first people to cross through the mountains of northern Africa.
Well, no, not the first. I mean, we were trying to be I think the first to do a continuous journey going from
Okay.
Morocco to. I mean, I'm not sure how much. I mean, I can't find any no matter how much we try to look. So, I mean, the first part, maybe it is the first, but we were trying to cycle going from Morocco all the way to Algeria, to Tunisia, via Algeria, which is the
Hmm.
hard country to get into, actually. So Algeria was a real missing thread in that piece, I guess. And so that was the gist of that journey. So you've seen the first part of that, which is cycling across Morocco. The second part is the one which is going through Algeria, which I'm hoping to have on YouTube within the next few weeks.
That was going to be one of my questions, and I know all the comments too are along the lines of, "Hey, when is this
Yeah,
next
yeah,
section
yeah, there is.
being released and all that?" That is one of the ones I think too that you kind of capture the essence of what you're doing the best, and it's incredible. It seems like in the first few days you're kind of in towns, close to towns, but then the Atlas Mountains get pretty desolate,
Yeah,
and you're just kind of on your own in these high mountain desert environments.
yeah. Yeah, I mean, like I said, it gets very, very, towns and villages gets very sparse in the Atlas, and you do have to cross. And I guess you can somehow be time constrained because this was like in the middle of Moroccan winter, so it's very, very cold in these. You can see like in some of those footages, you can see there's literally like ice and snow, in these places, and the sleeping bags and the tents we had wouldn't be able to probably handle those minus 10. 1 second. All right, here we go again. So yeah, going back to the Atlas. So yeah, we were a bit time constrained in the sense that we had to get to the next town. And that next town would be like something like, I don't know, 20, 30 miles away. But going over the Atlas Mountains where it's unpaved, going up and down, and some of these unpaved roads can get really, really, really quite treacherous at times. That was quite challenging, I would say, but yeah, I mean that's the part I love the most, really. Whenever there's desolate, desolate stretches, that's when I really come alive, really. That's why I really, when and also seeing civilization as well. Sometimes you see people passing by, coming down the donkeys, and they're gathering firewood, and you see life like it was, hundreds of centuries ago. It's still the same in those parts. So it's
Hmm.
almost like going back in time as well, because you have an unpaved road, you have people traversing on donkeys, gathering wood, and it literally is like going back in time. So
That's something that jumped out at me is that once you kind of got out of the cities and really started your journey, it was a very remote part of the world. It seems like that they see very few to no tourists,
mm.
and so their way of life is largely preserved.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. I mean, obviously, it's a poorer part. It's usually, I always say that the best places to go are those where the path that's less the path that's less traveled, basically. And certainly, I'm sure there are cyclists that go by. I know there's an Atlas Mountain race that happens as well, but certainly,
Hmm.
see the preservation of life and go through some of those villages, and children playing out, and the men are just there sitting on the street, wrapped in about 3 or 4 blankets, just sitting there in the cold in the street in the sun. It was just it's quite profound, actually. It really is. It's quite humbling to see that. Life is very simple,
Mm.
and and how, in contrast to how complicated it can be in the West. I mean, these people are like the most chilled out people in the world. Those who have the least.
Right. Every time you pass through the towns and see kids, they light up. They seem to really respond and almost identify that you're on a bike. They're usually on bikes, and it seems like you guys have such a great
Oh
interaction.
yeah, yeah. I mean, this is the great thing. Like I was saying, going about to that vulnerability, stroke openness aspect of
Hmm.
it. When you're on a bike, you get those interactions. People, you stop, and they run up to you, and they're quite curious, and some of the guys there spoke a little bit of English, and you always have these great encounters whenever you go to those places, because obviously they're not seeing cyclists passing by. I mean, I'm not sure how often the cyclists go by there, in the months where it's warmer, but certainly, we're almost like a novelty where people run up to you and they respond to you. Because if this was obviously a regular occurrence, it'll be like just normal passing traffic, like you see in Europe. Nobody really responds to you there as a cycle tourist. Whereas in places like Morocco and
Hmm.
Algeria, my goodness, I've never seen such a response.
See, this seems like a trip that's high on the vulnerability
Yeah.
scale. I noticed. Were you consciously trying to make it to a town every night and not sleep out? It seemed particularly
In,
cold
in
in the Atlas
in
Mountains.
Morocco, that was certainly the case, but even those hotels
Okay.
were ridiculously cold as well, because it is a cold time of the year and it was so high up. But at least there was some, they always had like a plethora of blankets that you would use to, I remember every hotel seemed to have about 4 or 5 extra blankets, and we'd have to use them all just to get some warmth. And the water in the
Mm.
boiler, and a warm shower would literally last about a minute before the water got cold again, really. So it was everything. So yeah, in that journey in particular, yeah, we did bring our camping gear, thinking that we were going to camp out at some point. But because the accommodation was so cheap, and wherever we found ourselves at the end of the day, there was always accommodation. So in that sense, Morocco does cater for the traveller, And there's no point really just to camp out in that cold, Especially, I mean, I have camped out in the cold before, and it's not nice when you got a tent that
Sure.
doesn't go down, that only has like a or when you have like a sleeping bag that has a comfort rating of like 3 degrees, and you're trying to cope with -10 temperatures. It's not. There's a bit of a mishmash, so we kind of went
Right.
a little unprepared, really, to that journey. Not thinking it would be as cold as it
Right.
was.
I imagine too that being out in the elements for that many hours,
Mm.
that for that long, it must be very nice at the end of the day, even if it's a chilly hotel
Yeah,
room, to
yeah,
to be indoors, kind of a
yeah,
little bit protected from the
yeah.
elements.
Oh, they always had like a little yeah, little wood fire going somewhere, so we'd gather around there sometimes.
Hmm.
So but yeah, it was just to have that civil life, because also it was, bear in mind, that time when we went to Morocco, it was security was pretty high at that time, because I don't know if you remember several years ago where these two Scandinavian Morocco tourists unfortunately got executed in that
Mm.
in that region where we were at. So and also there was one night in that journey where we were actually being followed by, we saw one car that was parked up in the middle of a desert road. So only light we had were on our bikes, and we can see obviously the cars weren't coming by as often, and this one car kept going back and forth around us. And then after the second or third time we went past us, we realized we were actually being followed, and then
Yeah.
we had to prepare ourselves. This is what I mean about the vulnerability aspect of cycling. Like we didn't know whether they were police trying to either look out for our because obviously the night on the first night when we got to the Atlas Mountains, we went past a checkpoint where we had to present our ID, and then they were asking which town you want to stay in, and then we said, okay, we want to stay in the next town, and then they made sure there was some police there to make sure that you got into your hotel, really, because the security was so heightened that they were basically, and obviously Morocco really depends on its tourism industry. That had been a big blow. Had the execution of those two Scandinavian ladies, that security was heightened.
Right.
So because security was heightened, we had, like, obviously you've seen that video where we're leaving a hotel one day where we're getting ourselves wrapped up warm, and then these guys come out to meet us to make sure that we were on our way, that everything was okay. But they actually met us the night before when we actually got into the hotel. So, we were under their watch. So the next day, like I said, when we got to this desert road, we found ourselves cycling into the night.
Oh, I lost you. And now you're back. Jump back in the story and to frame it. Two separate incidences, but this is it's an interesting topic, because you've talked a lot about vulnerability, but that it seems like security is a real concern, especially in potentially rural Morocco or that part of the world. How do you think about that? Go ahead.
Usually it's not. Usually Morocco is a safe country to travel, and like I said, a lot of its income is from tourism itself. Is Morocco, but on this occasion, I think it was in 2018, the end of 2018, where these two Scandinavian tourists got beheaded. Then everything was flipped. I was kind of suspect how they caught the guy who actually did it, literally a few days later. And I just thought that was all probably staged, just to make it look like they've actually, it's safe now. We've got the culprit, blah, blah, blah. I'm not sure how much stage that was, but certainly the beheading of those tourists, when people caught that live, that was actually done live, believe it or not. And many people actually saw that. So that's why the security at that time when we were in Morocco was heightened rather than being there any other time. And that's why
did that make you pause and say, maybe we shouldn't do the trip right now, or find another location?
Well, no, because that happened in late December, and we'd already planned this back in November. We said, okay, let's just do North Africa. So regardless of that situation, we were aware that security would definitely going to be heightened to some extent. We weren't going to. We just thought, okay, well, as long as we get ourselves off the road, before dark, then we should be okay, I guess. It's Morocco at the end of the day. This was probably this may have been an isolated incident, which it probably was, and and I don't think anything has happened since that extreme measure in Morocco since that time. But everything was still pretty raw, and that's why on the second day when we found ourselves on this desert road, heading towards the Atlas Mountains, we saw this car following us, and they weren't dressed in police. I got a glimpse of one of the guys, and it seemed to be like appeared to me like a villager. He had like a blanket around him, and he was kind of like looking a little bit down. I got a little glimpse from his car light that was in the window, and when he went past us about the second or third time, that's when we got nervous because it was dark. There were hardly any cars on this road, and we didn't know whether they were police. Just tracking our whereabouts to make sure we got into the next hotel, or we didn't know whether they were guys who were coming out to get us, really. So we pulled up by a petrol station, and I got my knife out to hand, just to some protection. I know, just something. If I have to go down, then if I'm going to get attacked, then I'm not going to go down without a fight, basically. But luckily, only a few miles after that, we managed to get ourselves into a hotel. And again, we didn't care if it was freezing or whatever. We were just happy to just get inside and off the road, really. And we don't know what. Yeah, so that was, and that's actually documented in that. Although they, showed the part where they were following us, I did edit that little bit in. that suspense part, because that's exactly what happened. So it kind of makes you realize, sometimes because sometimes your experience can always be like a positive experience on the road. Sometimes you can become complacent from this as well. If it's
Mm.
always constantly positive, and that was a bit of a wake up call actually. We were nervous that night.
Sure.
So,
Yeah, that's the thing. It seems like on the whole, you've had
mhm,
so few negative instances, and that it's
mhm.
definitely the footage of that is I can absolutely see is unnerving. And
Yeah, yeah,
that's got to be the challenge, right? Is that you've had so many positive experiences and even positive experiences in
yeah,
Morocco, and now
mhm,
you've got this experience that really it's just unknown, right? They could have
yeah.
very well been, as you said, looking out for your safety, but
Well, yeah, exactly, yeah. But the
right.
worst incident came. One of the worst incidents. I mean, like I don't want to. I mean, this is a positive channel, but you do have
Sure.
to be aware that, like I said, this is why I use the word vulnerable. There was an incident where I got held at gunpoint in Bosnia. I got shot at initially. The bullet missed, but I actually got held at gunpoint in Bosnia. I had a gun put to my head, thinking that
Oh
that
my
was the last
goodness.
moment. That was the last moment. This was early on in my world journey. This was literally within the first few weeks, of setting off.
Hmm.
This incident happened. To cut a long story short, I was just camping in a place I wasn't camping. It shouldn't have been camping really.
Okay.
That we deemed safe, and then I think the gunman was just trying to eliminate a threat. It wasn't coming out to rob us, and but having a gun put to your head and having a bullet, whiz by your head within inches was even more unnerving than I would say being followed in Morocco.
Sure.
Almost to the
Sure.
point where I thought to myself, I don't think I want to do this anymore. That was too much. That was too much for me to take. But there are some incidents but the overwhelming experience was, there were some negative insights. Don't get me wrong. I mean, I was on the road for 15 months on that world journey, and there
Hmm.
were some negative aspects of that journey. But when I say negative, other than getting injured or hurt or maimed, I mean they were negative enough to make you quit. That's what I'm saying. You know what I'm saying?
Right. Right.
So because on the second occasion,
So, hold on. We got to go
yeah,
through this gunpoint a little bit. It sounds like you were camping in a spot that perhaps you shouldn't have been. And then
yeah.
was that the next morning or that evening? That
Well, no. Well, what happened was that we were staying in the capital in Bosnia, for Sarajevo, for two nights,
Mhm.
and we were. Even as a youngster, I remember growing up in the 90s. I was a teenager, and I remember the Bosnian War pretty specifically. I remember the graphic images. I mean, back in
Mhm.
the 90s or the early 90s, they never held back on showing you gruesome graphic images on the news for some reason. But I remember some of those images and always being fascinated by the war in Bosnia, because outside of my local mosque, during that time of the war, in the mid 90s, there was a refuge truck that was going to take aid to Bosnia, that was collecting aid to Bosnia. And I remember looking at that
Mm.
military, it was a military truck painted in white. And I remember looking at that in fascination, thinking, my goodness, that's going to go all the way to Bosnia. So I was always, kind of intrigued or fascinated by the Bosnia war, because obviously it was obviously in my lifetime,
Mhm.
and in our lifetime, and also I never really understood what it was all about, until I got to Bosnia. And as we were in Sarajevo on that world journey, fast forward to the world journey, we were in Sarajevo and we saw signs of the war. It's still there today. You can still see some of these flat towers, some of these building blocks that are shelled out with bullet holes there. And there's
Mhm.
a place in the outskirts of Bosnia, of Sarajevo, called the Tunnel of Life, where it was a 5 kilometer tunnel where during the siege of Sarajevo they were basically hauling people and artillery to defend the city through that 5 kilometer tunnel that ran under Sarajevo.
Mhm.
And we were just fascinated that what could have been like these guys to live through this war. You know what I mean? And I remember we left Sarajevo pretty late, quite late that day. Maybe let's say middle of the afternoon. We just thought, okay, we'll just get back on the road, and then
Sure.
we got to the countryside of Bosnia, heading towards. We got into the Srpska region, which is quite separate from the region we'd come from, because it's still pretty split Bosnia, because the fallout is still rife. Not that they're fighting anymore, but they keep themselves to themselves. Each region would keep themselves to themselves. Like the Bosnia side of Serbia side will really interact with the Srpska side, will interact with like the predominant Muslim side in the middle, or Sarajevo. And so we found ourselves cycling late into the night, and we couldn't find it. We were somewhere high up, maybe about 1,000 meters in elevation, and it was middle of the night, maybe about 10 o'clock, and we were looking to our left and right, and we couldn't find anywhere to camp. because there's fields that they looked like they were just freshly plowed and there was no flat ground anywhere.
Mm.
And uh, and just in the middle of this road, we saw a house just off the side of the road that was shelled out. It was a completely shelled out house. They had like, I think they had like, wooden floorboards on the windows. The door was like open. There was no door, and inside the house itself, there was just dung, like cow dung that was dry, that was really hardened, and there was
Okay.
hay in there. That's all. That's all I could see in the house. It was shelled out. There's nothing in there. And but opposite that house, there was a house that was occupied. That was actually people were in there. I could see silhouettes of people moving around. And as I'm setting up camp, we set up our tents inside a small room of this shelled out house.
Mm.
And from my headlight, all I could see was the dust falling from the ceiling. And I thought to myself, this can't be a great place to camp. And I said to my friend, John, who you actually see, he's the same guy who's in the Morocco video.
Okay.
I said to him, John, listen, let's, so what I did, from seeing that dust, I actually went out the house to see if there was a nice place to camp outside the back side of the house, Maybe
Mm-hmm.
there's a nice little flat bit of ground. Maybe we can just camp out there instead. I don't want to be breathing in dust all night. And then I saw a barn. It was a big barn, actually. And the door was like a little bit open, so I opened the barn door.
Mm.
Looking, obviously my headlight was on, and there was all farming equipment there. It was all like, this looked like it was someone, like
Sure.
machinery and farming equipment. And then it kind of like made me realize that, I'm actually on somebody's occupied land. This is somebody's land. This is not deserted land. This is somebody's place. Then I go back in to the house and I said, John, listen, let's just get out of here. I don't have a good feeling about this. And John was obviously, he's like saying, okay, Imran, we'll be all right, we'll be fine. Obviously, it's the end of the day. We've just set up camp now,
Mm-hmm.
and we can't be bothered. What I mean, he'll be fine. He assured me that. Only a few minutes later, we can hear a car coming really fast from a distance. When it's revving itself, and you
Sure.
hear it's about to go by, and we just think it's going to go by the house, like straight past, and it does a handbrake right outside the house, and that made us all our heart stop. And I said, John, just hit your lights and get down. Just get down. The
Mm.
guy got out of the car. We hear the slamming of the door, and he starts obviously, shouting at us in Slavic, in Bosnian,
Sure.
whatever. We didn't understand a word. And next thing I knew is that he fires a gunshot into the house, and the bullet basically missed my head. 'Cause I was against the wall in line, not that far in line of the
Mm.
doorway, and the bullet literally missed my head, maybe by I would say about no more than a foot and a half,
Oh my goodness.
because I felt the shrapnel. I felt the shrapnel. Like the dust from the
Oof.
wall, from the bullet. From the wall it hit. I felt that hit my face. It was almost like somebody grabbing sand and whacking it on your face. Like a pitch of sand and
Mm-hmm.
throwing it on your face as hard as they can. That's exactly what it felt like. And the next thing I know is that all I can see is obviously there's a huge amount of light coming from his headlight from the area where his light is hitting to where the doorway is, and I can just see John going outside holding his hands up, and I'm just there thinking, oh my god, he's going to get killed, and I don't want to desert my friend, but I was looking for a back exit really in panic,
Right. Right. Of
thinking, oh
course.
my god, he's going to get killed.
Yeah.
And then next thing I know is that he just says to me, Imran, just get outside the house, get out, Imran, get out. And
Mm.
then I come outside the house with my hands up, and the guy had a gun. Obviously, I see he clearly had a gun pointing at me. And then he gestures for me in an aggressive way to get on the floor on my knees and put the hands behind my head,
Mm-hmm.
basically. And John was in the same way. And then basically, I was basically reading my last prayers. It's amazing how when you're convinced or pretty much convinced that you're going to get executed right now. This is the time where you're going to die now. This is the time
Oh
where you
my
get off.
goodness. Yeah.
Uh, there was no fear or anything. It was just like, okay, just do what you got to do, because there's no point. It's a weird feeling. What I mean? It's almost like a sense of calmness in a way, because you can't do anything when the guy's got a gun to your head, and he's always got to do his pull his finger a quarter of an inch, and literally that's it. That's it's over. And after being there with the gun held to my hand, I was just reading my last prayers, just whispering it to myself under my breath. And then slowly he backs away. He backs away. I think, what's going on here? And then there's an old man that came out of the occupied house, and I think must have been having a little chat with him. And in my mind, he must have been like, okay, well, he must have called him out
Mm,
to because obviously this old guy who was in the house occupied, he obviously saw two lights moving around the house. He's obviously thinking, what are these guys? What are these two lights moving
right.
around in a house?
Right,
Yeah, I
right.
mean, so obviously the fear. So so this is how I interpret it. But now the gunman comes back to us, saying stuff to us. This time he's had the gun to his side now,
Hmm.
and then my friend John tries to get out his wallet and say, "Listen, just take the wallet and please leave us alone." He shoved the wallet away, saying, "I don't want your wallet." And then I tried
Oh,
to say "Assalamu alaikum" to him. I tried to say "Assalamu alaikum" to him, like just trying to get some kind of Muslim connection with him. He said, "If he knows I'm a Muslim, and he's a
yep.
Muslim, maybe." That was the worst thing I could have said, because
Oh
as soon
no.
as he heard that, he got aggressive again. He pointed the gun to my head and started saying all kinds of slander to me. And I realized that, oh my god, this is where I'm in the part of the region where they don't get on with the Muslims here. This is pure hate stemming back from from a couple of
Sure.
generations.
Sure. Oh
But
no.
after he calmed down, after he calmed down again, he then just said, "Okay, take me to the house." Trying to just get into the house. I thought, he's going to take us, he's going to kill us in here now.
Okay.
He then as soon as he saw our tent, our bicycles, he immediately neutralized and put his gun down immediately, because he
Mm,
knew that we weren't a threat. Initially, he probably thought we were robbers. Maybe that's why that it must have been the old guy's grandson, or maybe somebody that he knew to come
right.
and eliminate the threat. Once he knew that, once he said to the old man, "No, listen," he put his gun down and then he put his hand on his shoulders and he said, "Listen, it's okay, stay. You can't sleep, sleep." He said, "Just sleep. It's okay. I go. You sleep. I go. Okay." And so he left us alone. Say, okay, he eliminated the threat. He knew that we were just travelers. We were just basically
Mm,
found a little house to camp in of all spots. He left us alone, and then I with my friend, I said to John, listen, I give a shit. I said to him, I kind of said, I was kind of in hysterics. I said to him, "Thanks for not killing us, but I'm getting the hell out of here. I'm not camping in here. No way. I'm not camping here after tonight." So when you're camping, that usually that stuff that it can usually take you about 20 minutes to set up camp, and it usually
hmm.
takes you longer than that to put all your stuff away. Meticulously. We just
Sure.
broke our tents down, shoved everything in our bag, and just got back on the road again. We just went cycling to the night until we found somebody in the next town who we relayed the situation to, and he gave us a room to sleep in that night. But that was the incident of the gun incident in Bosnia. And I
Wow.
remember the next day. Thinking, that was just too much, man. That was just too much of a close call. I don't know.
Hmm.
I don't know. And that was, and I was actually having thoughts about literally just going home now. But then you start to have more good counters as the day rolls on, and then you kind of lo and behold you get over it as well. Believe it
Hmm.
or not, and you just
Sure.
carry
Sure.
on. And so that was the gun incident.
That's a wow. That's an incredibly tense situation, and but it is interesting to see once they figured out that you're travelers. It really de-escalated
Mm.
the situation fast.
It did, because you got to see it from that point of view. I mean, there's an old guy in the house opposite, and all he's seeing in his dark house that he lives opposite are two lights moving about. I mean, of course he's going to be scared. What the hell's going on? He's probably never
Right.
seen that.
Of course.
So it was a de-escalation. The whole gun incident was a de-escalation, but luckily, like I said, it could have been fail, or it could have been ended up me with either be fail or being me being gunshot wounded, basically.
Hmm.
That's how close
Hmm.
I came to that. So that's just one of the. I mean, I don't mean to put any negativity out there, because I want to
Sure.
obviously encourage cycle traveling, but just be from that day, from that night onwards, I was always aware from that day onwards that I was always aware that if I'm camping somewhere, that I got to make sure 100% that it's okay to camp here, not just presume that it's okay just because it's shelled out, for example, like that house, you know.
If you replay that scenario in your head, would you be more likely
Mm.
to have approached the house? And I know it's dark, so it's kind of potentially questionable, but to just try to introduce yourself and explain what's going on.
Well, Well, it's funny you say that, because a year before that, I cycled across America's Route 66. Okay,
Uh-huh.
and again, there were a couple of times where I got cycling tonight in Missouri and in Oklahoma, and I literally knocked on the door of somebody's house and said, "Listen, I'm traveling across Route 66, and I just you know, and I later found out maybe it's not the best idea to do that because these guys can put a gun to your head if you're in the middle of nowhere. Do you know what I mean? Or whatever. But you know,
Right.
it happened a couple of times where I did knock on somebody's door and they were so accommodating as well. They please
Hmm.
take the land. And you know, one time when I was in Oklahoma, the man the man was giving me a great lowdown about the area and about the tornadoes that's happened here and all that kind of stuff. And I actually ended up making good friends with him. That I think he went off work before I woke up in the tent because he had a really early start. And
Hmm.
then his wife and his three kids brought me out breakfast towards my tent. I mean, stuff like that, you know. So it's
Fantastic.
sometimes because a lot of land going across America is a lot of it, you know, for a big land, for a big country, a lot of the land is private, you
Mm.
know, and I certainly found that in Oklahoma, you know, that a lot of it was private land, a lot of it was farmland, you know, or
Hmm.
pasture land or whatever, and sometimes just had to, if you couldn't find anywhere to camp, then you just had to resort to knocking on somebody's door, you
Of
know.
course. Of course. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I wish I
That's
did do that. I wish I did do that in Bosnia.
fair.
Yeah,
Fair enough.
sorry.
Yeah. That's a potentially, kind of challenging situation, as you said, getting towards the end of the day, and you got to
Hmm.
find a place to sleep, right? As far as that goes.
Yeah, yeah,
Wow.
yeah.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Those are
But I,
incredible
would-
stories.
but
Incredible.
I
Yeah.
would. Thank you. Sorry. But I would advise to anybody listening that you know my advice to you: don't leave it late in the day to set up camp if you're going to camp wild, unless you have somewhere
Okay.
to get to or a campsite to get to. Just a little tip I would give you: just set up camp before sunset. It's not always good to say. Sorry, I just thought I'd say that.
No, that's a good strategy, a good approach, right? Because it does sound like you can potentially run into delicate situations, right? If you're kind
Yeah,
of doing it a
definitely.
bit too spontaneously on that end.
Yes,
Uh,
yes. I mean, sometimes it leads to some amazing situations, which I did experience many times from that event onwards, going around the world. You know, many times, like I said, cycling into the night and then coming across villages and like in Iran and then being hosted and stuff like that. But you know, it's not always a negative thing. But I'm just it's just a pointer really, just for peace of mind. Because sometimes when you're cycling in the middle of the night and you can't find anywhere to camp, it can become a bit nerve wracking because you want to get off the road, you want to get a rest at the same time because you want to set yourself up well for the next day. You don't want to be
mhm.
sleep deprived or anything like that. So it is always best to do that. But I've just found myself getting into the habit of cycling well into the night and using the night as a great mask to disguise to basically to set up camp wild. You know, it's also a great mask for that as well. You know,
Mm.
if you want to set up if you want to camp wild and it's a great cover is the dark itself. You know.
I see what you're saying. Of course, yeah, right. You could be a little bit more low key about things. Do you
Yeah, yeah.
enjoy riding at night?
Oh yeah. I mean, there were times in Australia where I had no choice but to ride into the night because if you ever come across my Australia film, especially the first two, I started from the west coast,
Hmm.
and from Perth cycling to Sydney. But the time I was there, I went to where the prevailing winds were on the opposite way. So I was going to literally a headwind for most of the way, literally. I'm talking about a gusty headwind. And as you know, my setup is about as aerodynamic as a brick wall, you know.
Sure,
And
sure.
there were times where to make up ground, because I lost that much ground in the daytime, because whenever the sun was up, it brought the wind up with it. And whenever the sun went down, the winds died down, and that was the only time I could make up ground, really. And
Hmm.
so many times in Australia, I found myself cycling 3, 4, sometimes 5 hours into the night, you know,
Oh
across the
wow.
Nullarbor, especially the Nullarbor stretch. Yeah, even that long because I literally had to make up ground, or I felt I needed to make up ground because the wind was so frustrating to go against. Like it was every day. You know, you're going at half the speed using twice the energy, and that
Hmm.
becomes so frustrating that that you end up cycling into the night, just to make up ground because you don't want to be battling the headwinds all day. But having said that, it was one of the hardest stretches when I was going around the world. But it was also the best stretch as well when I look back. Going through that hardship.
Mm.
It's not great at the time, but the lessons you come out of that with, how it refines you as a character is something that I will never forget.
It sounds so impactful. And that's something that I've noticed in my own life, kind of with these outdoor adventures and stuff. I used to really shy away from doing any activity, backpacking, say, during the night. But what I found is once I started doing it, I actually enjoy it. Once you kind of push through that maybe initial anxiety over it,
Yeah. Yeah.
is that it's very rewarding, and you get to see the environment in a completely different area, and it's so peaceful and so tranquil, to kind of limit your field of view to only what's in front of you.
And this is one of the reasons why night cycling, why I find myself getting into night, because it's a time where the roads are the most quiet. You can really see some of the nightlife come out. Like, sometimes see some owls, and especially going through Australia. I mean, when I was looking into the sky, I mean, I'm in the Nullarbor here in the outback here, and you can literally see millions of stars, and you can see a shooting star almost every 10, 15 seconds. And I thought it was in my imagination, but when you see a star, when you see a sky that untainted, that pure, untainted by any artificial light, the stars just truly shine, and you can really see, it's like you're really looking far out into the galaxy, and it was just absolutely a sight to behold. And the
Right.
tranquility you get with the quiet roads as well. So
That's something that I notice, is that when I'm in the backcountry or exploring, the stars are so much brighter. It's incredible,
oh
right?
yeah,
And it sounds like it's that way
yeah,
for many of your adventures as well.
yes, yeah, absolutely. But then I'm a bit of a mile muncher as well, and I just like to
Okay.
get in a certain amount of miles too. It's just something I have in my head, as a cyclist, that I want to. I was going on Europe back in August here, back in August last year, and every day I had it in my mind, I want to do 100 miles, and I don't care if I have to cycle into the night. I just want to get out of Europe within 10 days. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
But I do like I said, I do like the tranquility of the night and what it brings. It's just a whole different realm,
Hmm.
and the day is amazing as well, but sometimes I can find the day, depending on where you are, can become a bit hectic at times as well. Sometimes it can be really hot, because I was going through Europe in a heat wave, and I found myself just, taking shelter in the daytime and cycling more in the evening and the night, really. So yeah,
Wow.
yeah.
Of course. Hey, it's Eric again. You reached the end of part one of this podcast. It went so long that I wanted to split it up. And it was such an emotional roller coaster. You see, at some points, I just go silent as I'm gripped as Imran takes me through the journey. I've linked below or in the comment section. You'll see part two of this podcast is actually on Imran's channel. Please head over and complete the story and give it a listen.